Election by itself cannot bring change, as I have said. An election is just a ritual because the whole process of the election is controlled by one candidate. It cannot, in any way be the avenue to cause change. And that's why we are conducting a campaign of non-violent civil disobedience, where protest, ordinary people to assert themselves and say this is unacceptable, and we protest against this in all ways, to peacefully protest, which is also a right, obviously, enshrined in our constitution. It has taken a bit of time because we are functioning in a regime of terror where people have been cowed for many years. So we've been going through a period of empowerment, giving them information and empowering them to understand that this is their country and they will not benefit from its resources and its opportunities unless they assert themselves, and that freedom does not come freely. You have to work for it. And happily, I think that realization has now happened. You can see the energy amongst the people in spite of the frightening, deployments that are, out there with ugly-looking machines of, armored vehicles and machine guns and and riot gears of all kinds. People are assertive, are saying, well, we are fed up. Simply understand that we are fed up. And they beat them and tomorrow they come back. So I reckon that through this avenue of people asserting themselves directly through protest, will lead to either some form of a dialogue process with the regime to then peacefully agree on a reform process that will lead to a transition, or if the regime is completely intransigent, then I can foresee a situation where the public the public strength of protest will be so strong as to overwhelm the regime as a whole, and have some kind of revolution. Frankly, our hope would be not to get there, because getting there leads to some other complications. What would be reasonable is for the regime to realize that its time is up, and that to take cognizance of people's demands, and to realize that people are really determined to have the changes they need and deserve, and therefore to come around and negotiate an exit and a transition to a truly democratic dispensation. That would be the preferred way as we see it. And this transition obviously would end with having a transparent and credible elections that whoever wins would then come into government. One of the safeguards that had been attempted in the constitution of Uganda that was promulgated in 1995 was to have presidential term limits. The constitution provided that a president can be elected for a term of 5 years, and after that term, if re-elected, would serve a second and last term. No president would serve more than 2 terms. And that was a very useful mechanism for checking this abuse of power. Unfortunately, before that provision could be implemented, Mr. Museveni, removed it, again in a very, very controversial way, paying members of parliament 5 million shillings each and so on and so forth, and intimidation, and that provision was removed. We believe that in that transitional process that we are talking about, there ought to be a constitutional review that takes on board all the other reforms, political reforms, economic reforms, legal reforms that are required, including reconstitutionalizing presidential term limits, so that no president can serve for more than 2 terms.
And can you just run through what it's like when you do peaceful protests or walk to work activities and things like that? You're trying to do the right thing there. What actually happens, and what kind of abuses are going on?
Well, really what has been happening is what is largely expected, because we are dealing with a determined, entrenched, and vicious dictatorship. And so frankly, anybody coming out to protest, to assert their right, will expect a violent response. And that's what we've unfortunately met. Brutal repression by the police and the military. 10 people were killed in the walk-to-work, peaceful walk-to-work protests. 10 people were killed. There were earlier protests in Uganda when the rights of the Kabaka, the king of Uganda, was denied the right to visit one of his areas. In that protest, close to 30 people were killed, very brutally. No investigation has been carried out into the deaths of these people. So brutality. I personally have been attacked and beaten and sprayed with all kinds of chemicals into my eyes. I nearly went blind. I've been arrested at numbers I can't count. But this is precisely to be expected. And so we look at it as a phase that is necessary, that is unavoidable, if we are to deal with the evil that we are confronting. And we only hope that we can have the stamina and perseverance to continue the struggle. And as I have said, happily, more and more people are, emboldened to take up leadership and to assert the rights of our people. So I have no doubt that, regardless of the viciousness, of the brutality, of the levels of repression, at the end of the day, the people will prevail.